All right, well, first off, welcome to the first ever joint venture between HPL Meetings and Events and Somm4All. We're here at the beautiful KIN Vineyards. Yes, clapping is allowed, please. Clapping, bowing, it's all allowed. For those of you tuning in online or catching this on the replay video, thank you for checking in with us. We have 5 enthusiastic tasters with us today that we're also volunteering throughout picking the last little block of Chardonnay here at KIN Vineyards. So without further ado, before we dive into our tasting component, we have a very special guest. We're very, very lucky to have the person that's really making history here in Eastern Ontario with regards to winemaking. KIN Vineyards, for some of you that may not know, is the only vineyard that is growing estate vinifera. And vinifera, those are the grape varieties that we all know and love, like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and that's growing here. Usually it's hybrid varietals, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in another video. But without further ado, very special guest, winemaker extraordinaire, history maker, Mr. Brian Hamilton.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. So the first thing I wanted to do this morning is to thank you all for coming out and helping us with the harvest. It's, it truly means that we can get the harvest in at an appropriate time, so many hands make light work. We really couldn't get through this challenging time of the year with all of the weather pressures without your help, so thank you. And I did actually want to just give everybody a little bit of a background picture as to what KIN Vineyards is all about, how we farm, what we grow, and why we're here, and then you'll be off on your tasting. So for those of you who've been out before to the vineyard, you'll know that we are a 47-acre piece of land, bordered kind of on the west by the Carp River, and on the east side we're basically butted by the escarpment here, or the Carp Ridge. So the property it's a large property that's currently planted with about 10 acres of vinifera, so 5 acres roughly each of Pinot and Chardonnay, with plans for us to do additional planting next spring of maybe another 3 acres of 2 other vinifera varieties, Cabernet Franc and Gewürztraminer. So we are going to be remaining with the vinifera model here, instead of growing hybrids, which can make lovely wines, and which we've certainly made in the past. Any hybrid wines that we make, we are going to be purchasing from other trusted growers, but our focus here on Carp Ridge at KIN is going to be vinifera. So that also leads us into talking about why is there this lovely site that's been chosen to plant vines. And in fact, it was a property that was founded in 2014. Two other groups had looked at the property to plant a vineyard. So there's something very uniquely suitable to this endeavor, and that's kind of a threefold explanation. There's our aspect and our exposure. So we face southwest, which means we get sunshine all day long. And so we can maximize the amount of sunshine and growing degree days that we get for these shorter season varieties. We're also located on some very interesting soil here in Eastern Ontario, especially on Carp Ridge, where we're located on a fault. So really our underlying parent material is gray limestone with glacial till over top. And each of the blocks of vines has a slightly different soil composition. So that will allow us as a winemaking team to explore how the fruit from those different soil types is going to taste and influence our future blending. And our aspect also allows the drainage of water and cold air. So it's a very exciting site to be planted on. And now we're moving into the 7th year. So we've in fact had 3 years of Chardonnay to kind of help us understand what our soil tastes like, and a couple of years of Pinot Noir. So we look forward to trying those wines as the years pass and seeing how ageable they are. Farming, it's a very important part of the philosophy behind any vineyard operation. We are not certified, but we farm organic by land farming wherever possible. I come from a certified background as a winemaker at other operations where the protocol for that might be a little bit too stringent, and in very challenging years we may be left without a crop. So I prefer to farm sustainably and responsibly but to still ensure the health of the company and the crop that we grow each year. So that's incredibly important, especially when you're talking about unique wines, because unique wines come from healthy soil, indigenous fermentation, so you're not controlling every aspect of the fermentation here at Carpridge, so the wines have more complexity and more uniqueness. So I think I've gone on a little bit about our background. I come to KIN from a 20-year background of winemaking in Niagara, Sonoma, California, and New Zealand. So I've learned from extremely good mentors, learned how they make wine in different terroirs, so that I can take that experience and do it here, where it's a little bit more challenging than perhaps some of the other regions in Ontario. Like Prince Edward County, we have to bury our vines at the end of the winter to protect them from the cold. And so it's not the easiest game in the world, but when you make spectacular wines, then it's all worth it. So thank you for your interest in what we're doing here, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. Paul?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but are we not on the same latitude here as Chablis? Here, which may come as a surprise to some people, but is that correct?
It is, and thank you for bringing that up, because Chablis, for those people who may not know, is a very northern region in Burgundy, France, where they're really growing Chardonnay in similar limestone type soils as to Carpridge, and also are probably amongst the most age-worthy wines in the world. So if you're looking at Chablis, you're looking at wines that have a very elevated freshness, a lot of acidity. That acidity can actually help those wines age for decades. And I can tell you, over the 3 vintages that we've made Chardonnay from this property, we've had quite wet years, we've had quite warm years, but each and every vintage we have a very elevated level of acidity, almost twice that of what we would get in Niagara. So in a similar thought process, our wines could be seen to be to be built for great ageability. And as a point of comparison for soils, Eastern Ontario has probably 4 times the mineral content of Niagara. So if you're looking at Niagara soils, they're probably identifiable with about 45 different minerals. Here it's like 145. So a huge suggestion there, if you believe in the importance of mineral content in the soils making quite fresh and ageable wines, then we're certainly exploring that here at Carpridge. Any other questions?
Don't be shy. No such thing as a bad question.
How far down do you cut the individual vines before you bury them?
So if you walk along the rows, and you're certainly welcome to do this after your tasting, we will prune all of the vines back to a very short trunk. So the short trunk is probably only about 6 inches above the soil. But if you walk through the vineyard now, even just behind us, you'll notice that there are already canes that are already tied to a bottom wire. That's a new approach that we've taken from our colleagues at Clausen Chase, who, similar to us, need to bury their vines every winter, but can't afford to wait until all the grapes are off the vine in order to make that process timely. In past years, we've been burying up to the middle of November, and the soil is very cold and the canes get very brittle. And so sometimes we run out of time, and there have been times when the rows aren't being buried, so essentially we're giving up all fruit on those vines for the following year. And so, that's not a sustainable model. So we have to learn how to do it better. So our colleagues at Clausen Chase select canes even before grapes are picked. And they're all tied down right now. They're all ready to just have soil mounded over them. And what that's really done from the winemaking standpoint is that it's made, like, our primary goal here as a producer of fine wine is to do whatever you need to do to make better wine each and every year. And we've been limited in past years. We need to get the crop off so we can bury. But you can see there that the winemaking's kind of following the viticultural necessity for burying, where it has to be the opposite. Our primary goal needs to be better wine. And if we can leave our fruit on the vine longer and get better ripeness like we did this year, and burying becomes less of a consideration because we've already handled it with a new and more efficient technique, then it allows us to reach our primary goal while still being responsible in the vineyard. So that was pretty verbose, but I think it shows you that you always have to be thinking about how to improvise in very marginal climates like this. You can't necessarily take models that work in Niagara because they just don't work here. Great question. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with Paul and Heather for your tasting. Thanks again for coming out. And if you do ever have any other extra questions, just contact me. Send me an email, Brian with an I at kinvineyards.com. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Excellent.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Heather. Okay, have a great afternoon.
Great. Thank you again to Brian. So very easy to see why KIN can do what they can do here when you have someone like Brian at the helm. Just, wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, and that's the difference in trying to grow vinifera up here. So for the 5 of you that we're picking today, anybody first time picking? 1, 2, and 3. And yes, before anyone raises questions or makes comments or calls Doug Ford, we are all socially distanced here. We're following all the protocols to make sure that everyone has a great tasting, but a very safe tasting as well. So 3 first time pickers. And have you picked before in the Ottawa or?
No, we picked here.
Oh, picked here. Oh yes, you were here a little while ago. Very good, very good. So today we were picking Chardonnay. For the 3 of you that was your first time picking, anything jump out at you that surprised you in how the grapes either looked or how the picking is done? Pretty straightforward?
It was nice when there was big grapes and then you could just cut and then fill it.
Hard to really compare if we haven't done the Pinot Noir before.
Understood, but just I didn't know, some people when they come up for the first time that I've been with are surprised that the grapes really grow the full stalk of the vine. Some people think they only grow down low or what have you, so I was curious if you had.
A lot higher up though. Most of what we saw was down below. I'm wondering, did they pick the higher up bunches earlier?
I don't think that, well, they may. So they're always looking at the sugar content of a grape, so no matter who the winery is. So they take the grapes and they have a little reader, and it's a scale called Brix, B-R-I-X, and they're measuring the ripeness of the grape. So they may go ahead and say, geez, these are getting a lot more sun, they're closer to the top, and do some picking. There's also birds and turkeys, and I think they do net here, but sometimes the birds do get a little creative, and they'll pick through the top as well.
Because I noticed that most of the grapes that I was picking were knee benders.
Okay.
I noticed they taste good.
Yes, they were nice and sweet. Heather and I were talking to Brian just before we started, and he was saying that the Brix count, or the sugar in the grapes, is the sweetest I think he's seen in 3 years of growing Chardonnay here. So that's not going to be a problem in the winemaking. It's actually a good thing. So it's it stands to produce another outstanding vintage for them. So he's very excited about that.
Now, don't they have to watch in a case like that? Then you don't want to have a hot wine.
Absolutely, and these are all and this is where the folks that know what they're doing can balance all that out. But each grape variety, you do need a certain sugar content to produce a decent tasting wine, and then they can balance that all out. And that's when we go through the tasting. That's what we're going to talk about as well, as balance as well, to see do you guys feel that everything is in harmony? Does everything play nicely in your mouth, or is there something fighting? Ideally, winemakers want to have a wine that where everything's playing nicely. It can change. You can have more of something at the beginning and then something else in the middle and at the end, but you don't want, as you said, hot. If you get that burning kind of feeling, that means the wine's out of balance usually, and it means that the alcohol is very high, maybe too much sugar, or they didn't acidify properly, or they had other challenges.
How do they, just to digress a bit, how do they balance off for the higher Brix?
So
They add chemical of any sort?
depends on the winemaker. I think there's over 60 different things that you can put into wine that's not grapes.
Yeah.
Now, and again, depends on the approach. Here, it's a very organic approach. So Brian will use natural acids to a degree. He may have a few other tricks in his tool belt, but at KIN, and like a lot of the boutique artisanal wineries that you'll see in Prince Edward County, Niagara to a lesser degree, because Niagara is becoming it's the Napa of Canada, or the Sonoma of Canada, depending which one you prefer. And that doesn't mean it's bad, but it's bigger, more industrial wine producing going on there, where here this is boutique, this is artisanal. Clauson Chase, he was talking about, those guys are boutique. There's a few others, Carlo Estates, Exalted, these are really small boutique guys, and they're taking very natural approaches. So they'll play with some acidification. Usually that's about it. You won't get 59 other things other than grapes in the wine here. So before any other questions? I mean, I'm not a winemaker, but I can try to answer some questions if there's anything about KIN before we dive through. So we think KIN was established in 2014. That's what we're led to believe. So this hasn't been here a very long time, and they've come a long way. They're producing, vinifera in 7 years here, which I think is it blows me away. I'll be honest. There are other wineries. In case you didn't know, there is a trail, the Eastern Ontario Wine Trail, and it runs from just east of here, Jabulani Winery, and it runs right through to the Quebec border in the east. All those other wineries, though, any fruit that's grown on their property are what we call hybrids. And they've been developed at the University of Minnesota for the most part through a big wine program they have there. And they can withstand the cold climates and the harsh rigors that we get up here. They don't have to bury that fruit, but they taste a little different. They can be very tasty in their own right, and KIN was in the early days, as Brian said, they had some of those here. But for the novice, when the first time you have a Marechal Foch or you have even Marquette, it's going to taste a little different than what you're used to with Merlots and Cab Sauves and Chardonnays. These are all vinifera, that's that family. Hybrids are what we call cold climate. So these guys are definitely doing something very unique here. That's why I mentioned I wanted to stress that out. All right, so are we thirsty? Very good. So the first wine that we've selected for you, and Heather and I did some pre-scouting. We dug deep, because that's what we want to do for people. Is we want to make sure you guys have a good time. So we came out and we tasted the full portfolio with Brian about 2.5 months ago. And for this event, we selected these 4. So the first one we're going to start with is their sparkling wine, KIN Sparkling. Anybody know why I'm calling it sparkling and not anything else?
You can't call it champagne
Exactly, and why not, sir?
because it's trademarked and regulated to the Champagne region.
Exactly. So champagne. So just a little it's a bit of a misnomer, but I do like to point it out. The folks in France, mes amis en France, they get all uppity if you call something champagne that is not produced in the Champagne region of France. And there's rules and regulations, and they have tried to sue vineyards outside of their region for using it. So when it's not made in Champagne, then we call it sparkling. It can be made so. Not anymore. You are not. You are no. The Growers Association of Champagne said no. We can't even do that. It's misleading.
So now it's traditional method.
So the method of the winemaking method is called traditional method. It used to be called method champenoise. Some people were using that, but no. The consortium said no. We don't want any kind of misleading information to have people think this may be champagne, because people were putting method champenoise on the bottle and jacking the price by $10, and the consumer didn't understand that it wasn't champagne. But that's a great point. I was going to mention that, but thank you for mentioning. So if it's not in Champagne, it's sparkling wine. Now, when you get into Italy and you get into Spain, there's other names like Prosecco, and that's a different winemaking technique that's different from the Champagne method for the most part, although there are some people doing traditional method. And then you have Cava from Spain, sparkling wine again, certain types of grapes. Do we know, so sparkling wine, so champagne is done with a secondary fermentation in the bottle. That's why it's very expensive and time consuming and tasty. Sparkling wines can be made that way, but they can't be called champagne, or they can be made by what's called the Charmat method, which is you do the secondary fermentation in a tank and you let that happen and then you bottle. Or to a lesser degree, not here at KIN, but some people will just essentially use a soda stream. And essentially they're just injecting gas, CO2 into the wine. So teach their own, and I'm not here to say which is better than that, but those are the 3 methods. So for us today, we have a Charmat method, KIN wine, sparkling, 100% Vidal. So I encourage you all to take it up. Everybody's got their own approach to tasting. This isn't a crash course on how to taste wine. I like to do 3 things. I like to get to know my wine first. I kind of bring it up and go, hey, how do you do? Nice to meet you. You're going to taste delicious. And then I kind of measure how intense it is on the nose. But for you folks, whatever you're comfortable with, give it a nose. Now again, we see it often with sparkling wines, we see Chardonnays as a great variety regardless of the region. In this case, we have Vidal, which does very well in the Canadian climate. What do we think on the nose? Do we like it? We're not so sure.
No, I like it.
It's good.
Light on the nose.
Ripe.
Light.
Light. Yeah, definitely light.
Yeasty, bready.
You're getting a little bit of the yeast. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Jeanette, anything for you stands out? Okay, Heather, fruit. Happy with it? All right, let's take a little taste. When I taste, I like to encourage people to take 2 sips. The first sip is just to kind of coat your mouth and to kind of get rid of any of the other flavors that may be in there from coffee or from wine or gum or whatever. And the second taste, if you swish it around your mouth, if you can do that, coats all your flavor receptors, and then you can get a true sense of the wine. So I'll go back in for my second sip. What do we think? Do we like that? Do we find it refreshing? Do we find it bright?
Yeah, refreshing is a good word for me.
So with sparkling wines, traditionally you want to have a lot of acid and you want your mouth to water a little.
On the inside of your cheeks and that.
Exactly, it puckers your mouth, and that's a sign of the acidity. When we talk acidity or we talk sweetness, we call this dry. So the more your mouth waters and the less sugar you taste, that's the more dry a wine is. This one is very, very dry. It tastes a little sweet on it smells a little sweet on the nose. You almost think there's a bit of sugar in there, but for my palate, I find when I do taste it, it's very dry. Mouth is still watering from the acidity. You know, I get some stone fruit in there, some pear, some apple, get a little floral. What do you think, Jeanette? Is it your cup of tea?
Like it stays in mouth long.
And that's the key. That was my other question. So do you find everything plays nice in your mouth, or do you find something competing? There's no wrong answers. Everybody's getting along? Nice long finish.
A long finish, right? You're still tasting it, right?
Absolutely. And and that's what you want. You don't want something that's going to, when you taste it, ideally, you don't want something you taste it and then it dies right away. A really, really short finish. That can be disappointing as a wine. So we like this a lot. We thought it was very good. Sparkling Vidal. Now the fruit is not from the estate here. The fruit is from Niagara, but the magic happens in the shed over there with Brian. And at $22.95 a bottle, I think it's a fair price for what they're doing. I'm not a salesman for KIN, but we did think it was a very fair price point for sparkling wine.
There's good strong legs on my glass.
Right.
Is that important?
Depends on what you're trying to do as a winemaker. So legs is an indication of the sugar, the residual sugar that's in the wine. Sparkling wines, generally you wouldn't want big, fat, heavy legs coming down. Now, Asti Spumante by Martini and Rossi is sugary, and that's what you'll see there. And those folks are making that style because that's what people used to like to drink, and some still do. But they're not trying to make a crisp, refreshing sparkling wine. They're making a very sweet type of wine. So it really depends on what you're looking for as a winemaker. But if your intent is to have crisp, refreshing, light sparkling, then you don't want the legs to be too big. Vidal, as a grape variety as well, is also a grape that has a higher sugar content naturally than Chardonnay. So if you were to do a Chardonnay, you may not see this with a Chablis because that's the Chardonnay grape, and just by nature of being that type of grape variety, it doesn't have the same sugar content naturally. Do you have a bottle?
Yeah, would you like to see? And then we'll just pass the
Sure.
bottles around of the wine.
So for those of you watching on the video or watching live, this is the Charmat method of KIN sparkling wine. I'll put this over here if you guys want to take a look at the bottle as well. All right, so decent start. Pretty happy with that. Okay, are we ready to move on to? If you want, that's completely up to you. If you get to keep, if you want to keep these afterwards, just some notes as to what you were tasting, by all means use that. You don't have to. We can throw them out after.
I have some additional paper too if people would like to.
Okay, so we're going to move on to number 2. Now, number 2 on the top left-hand side of your, sorry, top right-hand side of your, get my cheat notes out. So this is last year's version of what you picked today. So this is Chardonnay, 100% grown in the vineyard behind you. This is, again, estate fruit. This has seen 10 months in French oak, along with stainless steel. As Brian talked about, similar latitude to Chablis. So we're in that same growing latitude as Chablis. Recently in January, the Canadian Culinary Championships that were held here in Ottawa in January before COVID, before the pandemic hit, the tasting panel there scored this between 90 and 92 points. So it was very well received. Now, just because they liked it doesn't mean you will, because wine is very subjective and we all like different things, but I encourage you to give it a little smell. See, off the bat, I can smell a little bit of the butter aspect of the that comes from the malolactic that goes through, or we convert harsh acids. But it's not overpowering. Sometimes sometimes I'll order a bottle and I'll open one and it's like a big bowl of cinema popcorn, and I go, that's a little too much for me. This I like. I'm sorry? Aussies, yeah, and it comes down to the use of oak, right? Some people like this I think is only a percentage of new French oak, so they're not really trying to get that butter smell too bad. They're not trying to get too much vanilla in there. It's just careful use and trying to balance everything out. There's this bit of soft pear. I get a little white peach on the nose. We'll go in for a little taste. I want to say it's 2018, and it is. Yeah, so go over here, our viewers at home, 2018. Yeah, so it's picked 10 months French oak, stainless steel ferment. So I get some of the vanilla, I get some of the wood tones, I get that butter and that yeast, but again, the fruit still shines through for me, which I like. I know Heather and I were quite taken with this when we had it with Brian a few months ago. The fruit doesn't get lost. Sometimes you get into certain regions or certain winemakers and all you can taste is the oak and the vanilla and the butter. And if you like that, there's nothing wrong with that. That was a style that California was doing for a long time. We're calling those, wood bombs from California, Mondavis and those type of guys back in the 80s, and it was really popular. People wanted that. Now everyone's dialing it a little bit back, and the general populace in North America is seemingly enjoying Chardonnays that have a bit more fruit still on the palate and less oak use. So that's what he's aiming for here. It's yeah, the palate follows the nose, which I like. Nothing surprising in here. I find the finish fairly long. I'd say it's a medium long finish. Ends nice and soft. What do you guys think? So, what I'm saying makes sense? Sandra, you're studying in the program, in the Algonquin Sommelier program. So am I saying anything that sounds crazy to you? Feel free to critique. It's been very good. So now this one's at $39.95. So when you get into some of these boutique artisanal wineries, you're going to find that you're not going to find a lot for $9 on their shelves, and there's a reason for that. I'm not saying $9 wine is bad, but it's very industrial produced. That's how they're able to save costs, and that's how they're able to price it at those levels. When you get into things that are sitting in barrel for 10 months and the expertise that Brian has, and you're seeing the labor that's required. I mean, we're volunteering here today to pick, but throughout the year they have to pay people to come in, and it's all hands-on, very hands-on operation, and that costs money. So at $39.95, I still think it's good value for what you're getting. It is a very good wine. Easily, when you get into Burgundian wine, from France, and you get into, Chablis entry levels start around that $35 to $39, and that certainly at that price point isn't the best expression of Chablis. So hopefully you're not too put off by the price point. Again, I'm a big believer in you get what you pay for. So would you buy this wine? Not saying today, but would you buy it?
Probably, yeah.
Except that I have two 2017s at home.
Understood, but
It would depend. I mean, I would like to, I know it's not apples to apples, but I would still like to have a bottle of that and a bottle of a better Chardonnay. Just to see. Now, I know it's going to be more flinty and more steely. And,
it depends on the region, though. I mean, you could do that, and that's something, you know, if you wanted to do that, if you wanted to get a little group together, we could look at that, because we could. That's a fun exercise. And it doesn't all have to be Chablis, though. It could be just be Chardonnay from Burgundy, and then different regions, and you get into, you know, the Macon region, and absolutely fine. And we could look at that, and we could do some research to find soil types so that we kind of line it up, you know.
I think when you're doing something, that kind of tasting, you're best just to focus on one.
It is, if that's what you're looking for stylistically, absolutely.
Well, no, I mean, I like, don't get me wrong, I like Syrah a lot. I like both.
For sure.
But I just think that you kind of dilute what you're doing if you're.
It depends on this. I'm not disagreeing with you at all, sir. I think it depends on what the goal is.
Yeah.
So for today's exercise, well, I'm just saying the goal today was to showcase KIN and what they can do, and what we think are kind of their upper echelon wines, growing 33K from Parliament Hill in Canada, which again blows my mind. But you're right, when you do look at different regions, and whether it's Canada's involved or not, it is very interesting to see. You can even go more granular than that, as Sandra would know from the program, and you can look at just one pocket of a country, and you could taste Burgundy and just do either the reds or the whites and go through and see, you know, quality winemaker, so everything else being equal, and you'd be fascinated, and it would be fascinating to do, and I've done it, to see that almost across the street, this vineyard and that vineyard, and they're pretty much the same techniques that are being used, but just one gets a touch more sun, one gets a touch more wind. You know, these slight nuances can make a really big difference. And that brings up a good point. When I say to people, you know, when I talk to people about wine, sometimes they say, I don't like Chardonnay. And you know, 5 years ago when I was in the print media world and whatever, I'd say, okay, well, you don't like Chardonnay, that's fine. But having dived into the wine world now, wine and spirits and sake, you know, you learn more, and I find that's a dangerous statement to write off a grape because you've had it once somewhere and you don't like it. You know, you may love Chardonnay from KIN, or you may not, but if you go to, you know, people at Classon Chase, as he mentioned, that's why I'll mention them, or Carlo Estates, or places in Niagara that are doing Chardonnay, it's all going to be very different. There will be some similarities, but we're not separated that far. I mean, you can be in Niagara in 5 hours from here, 5.5 hours, and yet the soil is different, as Brian said in the beginning. The climatic influences are very different. So to say you don't like Chardonnay would be a disservice to your palate. Because you would be missing out on maybe a style and a producer that you like. And you could absolutely do this any country in the world.
I think you can tell this is a quality wine. I think the comparison shouldn't be, is this better than that?
No, but it's just different. Not better, but different.
Exactly.
I agree. It's not, and because what you like and what I like could be completely different. So who am I to say it's better?
Oh, yeah, no.
If you like it, you like it. If I don't like it, doesn't mean it's bad wine. Just means.
I've never liked Peony, and now all of a sudden.
Right, and climates are changing, and this is the thing, everything constantly changes. Okay, so sounds like that's a hit. Excellent. Now we're going to dive into some reds. So we chose the Gamay, the Civil Grit Gamay. We were pretty happy with this. We had a barrel tasting with Brian about a month and a half ago, and this has just been bottled, hasn't been in bottle very long. And sometimes I find Gamay for myself can be a little hit and miss. Sometimes I really enjoy it, sometimes I don't. My mood could play a big part of that as well. You know, if you have a bad day, or if you're tired or whatever, you could have the same wine and think it's great one day and terrible the next, or vice versa. But I find overall with Gamay, I'm a bit picky. That's me. This though, I was very happy with the fruit. Nice red fruit off the hop. you know,
And this was just released, right?
just released. I think if it's only.
Time for Thanksgiving.
So what are some of the notes that I took on this? Yeah, so the fruit's from Niagara, so they don't grow Gamay here on site, but they have a quality producer in Niagara. You know, just red berry, a little bit of cranberry I get as well. So I get like strawberry, I get cranberry. I get a little bit of red currant, but fresh red currant, not dried, not cassis. You know, and I get just a little bit of pepper, like a white pepper on the nose.
At the very end.
I don't know if the color will come through, but again, almost Pinot-esque in its color. You know, it's very, very light. And that same red fruit profile, that cranberry, that strawberry. I get a little earth, which is nice, but a little fresh earth. Doesn't put me off whatsoever. White pepper again coming back, and I find my mouth watering. And personally, I like that with a red. There's nothing wrong with a big, bold, heavy red in front of a fireplace, but when it's, I think, what are we, 11:30 in the morning, and we're doing a tasting of red wine, I kind of like the lighter side. And I like the fact that my mouth is watering. And to me, that signals that this is a very food-friendly wine. You know, high acid, so whether you're enjoying it with some of the cheese or the bread or whatever, you could easily have this with turkey or, you know, any type of white protein would do well.
Barbecue.
Salmon, yeah, salmon, especially with a little bit of a glaze, it's got a little bit of spice to it. So a little fresh black pepper that's in there or something else, absolutely stand up to that, not a problem. Now on your tasting mats, I got the prices backwards. This comes in at $21.95. So I just looked down and went, oh wait a minute. So yeah, so this Silver Grit Gamay is $21.95, which I think is a bargain. That's the Irish in me. My father's from Ireland, and you know, whenever there's a great deal, my granny would always say bargain. It's bargain. So I think for $22 for this, for the quality, bargain.
I like the nose on it a lot. I find the nose flowery.
I get a touch of violet in there.
It is flowery, you're right. Yeah.
Very, very nice. And it doesn't die fast. You know, it doesn't stick around forever either. And I think that,
Really nice finish, though.
yeah, really nice finish. Nice, and it leaves your mouth feeling very clean.
Yes.
So big fan of that wine. Sandra, what do you think?
I like them.
Putting you on the spot. I'm not putting you on the camera, but I'm putting you on the spot.
That's a bargain.
Bargain. See, gentlemen, in the end, he's got it. Bargain. Bargain.
Yeah, I'd consider that after what we had Thanksgiving.
Hey lads, it's
We
a
had
bargain.
a Morgon, which is the same price.
And
Like a classic thing.
And I would take this.
yeah, and I think the price, and it's not always about price, of course, but I think price is a consideration because we're not all independently wealthy like Heather. You know, some of us have to count our pennies. And just teasing Heather.
Taste-wise, it's interesting.
And I think it's
It's not run of the mill.
no, and I think for the price, that's where I was going with that. Is I think it's very price appropriate. It's got enough interesting notes to. It's not a watery Gamay. It doesn't die fast. You don't buy it and go, geez, well, that's very uninteresting. But it, you know, you're not breaking the bank for it either.
What would you pair it with, Bob?
Well,
My go-to for pairing.
Usually, like we almost always have Beaujolais in our trout with our turkey, with our chicken, with salmon, tuna.
Yeah, I can see it standing up to tuna. Yeah.
Because we like red wines with fish, if you can do it. I mean, I wouldn't be having this with halibut or anything.
Right.
But I
You do it
think
just for the halibut.
it's a nice sipping wine on
Oh, it
its
is a nice
own.
sipping
Yes.
wine.
It doesn't bake food, but it certainly would
No,
complement
it doesn't bake food.
But no, you were talking about Beaujolais, which is interesting because sometimes they can get, I find anyways, I had one recently, I had a Morgon recently, and it was about the same price as this, and unfortunately it wasn't as interesting as this. You know, and of course I bought it at the big government outlet liquor place here in Ontario, but they can be hit and miss.
Yeah, I won't buy that one again.
You know,
With the-
well,
You've
yeah.
got good ones and bad ones, and this one was not good.
And again, it all comes down to what you're looking for, what you're pairing with. But yeah, it can be a bit hit and miss. And
No, this is the real bistro wine in France. That's what
absolutely, when when you're in Paris and you order the carafe, they have these little small pitchers, the pichets and the demi pichets. My wife and I love that when we've been there. Exactly, you're sitting there and you're looking out and you're actually, depending where you are, for either the 16th or if you're over in by Saint-Germain-des-Prés or wherever, and you're just people watching and you're having a little snack and you have your little pichet. That's a great comment. All right, so we're ready for wine number 4. So I moved it to the end. I had them reversed, but I said, well, let's end on the KIN Classic. So this is Pinot Noir, which I think you folks picked. I believe this is 2018 as well. So our 4th wine, 2018. Again, hand-picked fruit, and that's something that's interesting as well, folks, because one thing Brian didn't talk about was the fact that it's hand-picked, and we know because we picked some of it today, and you've been out before. When you're picking fruit by hand, you're able to right away make the determination as to what gets included and what's not. When you're buying some other wines that are industrial produced and mass produced, and I did say some, they have these big machines that go through the vines and they shake them, and that's how the grapes fall into the bins. You're also shaking out the squirrels and the snakes and the birds nests and the moths and spiders and fruit that is either rotted or dried up. But as we did today, we were taking out some of that stuff. So of course, when you sort the grapes before you make the wine, you can get rid of some of that stuff, but in the big industrial places, it doesn't always make its way out before it's pressed. Now, of course, you don't get that in your final wine because it's fined and filtered and whatever, but quality goes in right from the start when you handpick, regardless of the winery, regardless of the region of the world. So this is, again, handpicked. Great color. Very delicate, I find. And I think Heather agrees with me. Just a very light cranberry. Let's call it red, but it's almost like a blush. And then on the nose, Pinot is, if you like Pinot, whether you like it delicate or do you like it more, what I call dirty. So a dirty Pinot, very earthy, mushroomy. This, I think, is more on the delicate side, but I like it just as much.
Funny, I like, strangely enough, the little lighter rather than the heavy stuff.
But you like what you like, though. So I mean, and that's
It's good.
Heather, are the Oregon Pinots that I like, are they dirty?
I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't call Oregon dirty. No, I wouldn't know.
No, dirty, you like that term. Well, and I mean dirty by earthiness, and so this I get more fruit. I get more of that cranberry, and I get more of a cherry, that bright cherry on the nose.
I found it's herbs for me.
There is some herbaceousness, absolutely. There's some savory notes in here. Yeah, whether it's similar to thyme or whether it's or just savory itself as an herb, absolutely. I do get a little earth. I don't really get mushroom, but I do get a little earth.
What are the Pinot Noirs that you guys like? Mike, Marjorie.
No, for me, I like delicate, and for Mike, he likes it heavy.
You like it more earthy, more.
They like the Chilean.
Well, that gets into that.
Russian River Valley.
So with Chilean, you got to watch some of them because now, do you like a sweet Pinot or a dry Pinot? California, the hotter climates have a more challenging task ahead of them to make a Pinot Noir that's not sweet because of the sugar. Now, Pinot Noir, and I was going to tease Brian when he was here. I've teased him before, but I think he's nuts for trying. I can't really say that these days, but I think he's very adventurous for trying to grow Pinot Noir in this region because Pinot Noir itself, no matter where you grow it, it's known as the heartbreak grape. Very, very, very thin skins, and it's very temperamental. It doesn't like change. So if it's hot or cold, it doesn't do very well. It's very susceptible to birds eating it. It's very susceptible to rot and to a whole bunch of other other diseases that grow on vines. So to grow it here in a climate that's got such up and downs and whatever, I think is incredibly, incredibly adventurous.
When we picked the Pinot, there was a lot more sour rot.
Right.
Sour rot, and the Pinot grapes than there were.
Right.
Was in the Chardonnay.
And that's part of Pinot itself, Pinot Noir. It's just the grape itself is very delicate, and that's why I said it's called the heartbreak grape by winemakers because you spend so much money.
Rain just before harvest here, so
You know, rain can burst the skins. The berries can swell very easily. The skins burst, and now you've got rot. You can't do anything with it. Or if it doesn't burst, but there's a lot of rain, the Pinot becomes very watery. If it gets really hot, or I mean, Chile's got, it depends where it's grown in Chile because of the mountains, but there's certain regions where it gets a lot of sun and it doesn't really get that cool at night, so you're going to get a sweeter Pinot. California has some of those, so it's very, very challenging, and I think it's you know, it's a big tip of the hat to Brian and the team here for.
Something like a Pinot Noir from Alsace, for instance.
Well, and those are very different as well.
Totally, yeah.
Alsace, and you get into, of course, Germany just across the border, and then you get into, you know, Spätburgunder, which is, you know, it is Pinot Noir, but where it's grown in Pfalz and Baden and whatever, and the influences of the rivers and those high, steep mountainsides where they grow it has a different complex profile as well. So again, going back to what you said before, and that's something that, you know, as we build and go forward with things, we could certainly do, but it'd be interesting to look at a Pinot Noir from France, northern France, and then you get into Germany, but then you actually get bottles that say Spätburgunder on it, because those are in different regions as well, and within, you know, 100 miles or 150 miles or 230 kilometers, you could pick 4 different Pinots that should really all be the same terroir, but just one, as I said before, will get a little more sun, a little less sun. It's going to be a little cooler where it's grown, or a little warmer, and that will change the profile dramatically.
So I expect most of the Okanagan Valley Pinots that you find, like Cedar Creek's the one I know, are going to be higher in alcohol and
They could be, but so they definitely could be in the Okanagan. The Pinots and reds in general could be higher, but it really comes down to your vineyard management and what you're doing. If you leave more leaves on the vines and you protect the fruit, then you're shading them more. You know, it depends on winds, and there's a whole bunch of factors, but if you just go in and just grow and pick, certainly on a more industrial type level, then yes, the more heat, the more sugar, the more sweet, for the most part. So this one comes in $44.95. So this is, you know, this is real money, but it's real Pinot. Again, it comes back to hand-picked, hand-maintained. You know, stylistically, it's whether you like it or not. But in terms of balance and in terms of acidity and in terms of everything lining up the way a quality Pinot Noir should, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but a quality Pinot Noir, it ticks all those boxes. And again, blows my mind, you know, Parliament Hill, not very far that way as the crow flies. And this is what we're producing here. So, you know, that's our take on KIN and the 4 wines. I like to ask this just for fun. Any favorites of the 4? Is there any one that stood out? You don't have to tell me what it is, but did one stand out more than another? Sanders nodding. We have one nod.
The Chardonnay for me, I'm usually a red wine drinker, but that Chardonnay is very, very impressive.
And I was going to say the same thing, Chardonnay, and I'm one of those people who would have said a while back, I don't like Chardonnay, but it's really, I don't like heavily oaked.
Right, and that's the dangerous when you write off something. You say, or it's like saying I don't like carrots. Well, do you not like boiled carrots, braised carrots, raw carrots, pureed carrots? You know, and it's tough to, now some people will not like anything about it. I do not like mustard. Anything, I don't care where it comes from, who makes it, what's in it, what country I'm in, I do not care. I cannot go near the stuff. Hey, don't even like the color of it. But that's, you know, so fair enough. And there will be some people that will not like Chardonnay no matter what. But I don't think that everyone gives it a chance. I have tried different mustards. My wife has forced me to try different. She's tricked me into trying different mustards. Not my thing. So I'm happy that, you know, that you're on the Chardonnay train to a degree within certain aspects.
Yeah, no, I've been more on the Chardonnay train over the past little while, probably Heather's influence.
Very good, very good.
My favorite grape.
And any standouts for you folks on this end?
I like the Chard and the Gamay myself.
I like the Gamay.
Gamay is a bit of a sleeper. in my opinion. We forget about it. We forget that Ontario can grow good Gamay, and we certainly, I forget myself, a Gamay doesn't always, in Ontario, have to grow in Niagara. And there's some peck producers and Prince Edward County peck, and then here, very interesting, very reasonably priced, something that I would include in my rotation of wines.
I like the sparkling one too.
Sparkling's very nice as well.
I really like sparkling.
That'd be an interesting food wine, actually.
The sp-
With trout.
The sparkling?
The sparkling one was asking me for
Pan-fried
cheese.
trout would just be perfect.
Yeah,
Yep.
Did you try it with some of the cheese that was provided?
I did. Well,
Yeah.
actually, I was drinking that thinking, can I open my cheese? Can I open my
Absolutely.
cheese? And then I finally did.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I neutralize goodness.
So to the online audience, we're gonna wrap it up. For our folks that are here in person, we're gonna field a bit more questions. But this was just a snapshot of what Heather and I are working on doing. If you would like more information, if you'd like to book something, if you have inquiries, I'm gonna have Heather come on around side here. Certainly use the Instagram here. You could send a DM through, or you can visit hplmeetingsandevents.com to get all of .ca, sorry, I'm .com. So hplevents.ca for Heather Lockwood, and find out all the stuff that Heather's working on, and you can reach Heather that way, or you could visit www.somm4all.com, and that's my site. But we're working together to try and reinvent things and find the new normal so that we can bring events to people virtually. Thank you again for your time, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.
So a couple of you know me, I always have things to say. Today happens to be